I'm Bob Short. This is Reflections on Georgia Politics, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies and the library at Young Harris College. Our guest is Eva Galambos, who is the mayor of Sandy Springs, Georgia, and we're delighted to have you on our program.
Well, I've been to the library and I'm aware of your program.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a positive response.
Well, the library building is spectacular, and I think this is a good program.
Well, Mayor, as in your biography, you said that you've had a very good life. Your autobiography, I should say. Tell us about your life.
Well, I was born in Berlin, Germany, and a Jewish family. My father was a judge, and of course, judges were among the very first that were told, goodbye, your job's gone. So in a way, that was a blessing, because in 1933, we got out of Germany. And we went to Italy and lived in Italy, which of course is a beautiful country, and the people are friendly. And so I only have good memories of Italy. And when Mussolini came into power, and at the end he was, I guess, pretty close to Hitler, and I think over the wishes of the Italian people, he decreed that the Jews could no longer go to school, no longer work. So we got that message pretty quick too, that we had to get out of Italy. But I have nothing but good memories of Italy. My father was very, very lucky to receive a teaching assignment at the University of Georgia. And that was engineered by Harold Hirsch, who at that time was general counsel for the Coca-Cola Company. And Mr. Hirsch was instrumental in helping Jewish refugees come to the United States and try to find a job for them. And that's what he did for my father. And that's how we ended up in Athens, Georgia, which was a culture shock. And I didn't know much English. We had a tutor the last 6 months in Italy, so we had a little bit of knowledge, but it was pretty rudimentary. And I was put in the 6th grade in elementary school in Athens. And then I completed my high school in Athens High School. I was valedictorian and have nothing but wonderful memories of those high school years. Of course, those were war years. And that was one reason we walked everywhere and rode our bicycles everywhere. Nobody had any gasoline money. My family didn't have a car. We were still on very, very tight income in those days. The university professors didn't make much different from today. So I graduated from high school and went to the University of Georgia and had a wonderful 4 years at the University of Georgia. I was president of the Di Phi sorority. I was on the Glee Club, International Society, Debate Club. I was on the go. Enjoyed people, enjoyed doing things. So I also graduated with my husband in 1948, business administration. I came out summa cum laude. I never made less than an A, which is very hard on my children. And now it's hard on my grandchildren. I expect the best. I came to to Atlanta after we were married and went to work. My first job was a very interesting job with the Journal of Labor, because I had a master's by then of labor and industrial relations from the University of Illinois. And so I came to Atlanta, we got married, and I was the breadwinner because my husband was in medical school. So I really
at Emory?
needed...
Was he at Emory?
At Emory Medical School. So we married when he was a sophomore. And the Journal of Labor was owned by a fellow named Cicero Kendrick. And Cicero Kendrick had come up through the Typographical Union. So he was self-educated, and in those days the printers, they set type. They knew what was going on in the world because they were setting type on all the important stories. So he was a self-educated man. He owned the paper. And that was in the days of the county unit system. There were only 3 legislators in the Georgia House from Fulton County. He had been one of them. One of the 3 seats was a dedicated labor seat, which I don't think many people remember that. So he introduced me to Georgia politics, took me to the Georgia legislature, which was quite a revelation. In those days, the place was full of spittoons. And I don't remember the name of the speaker, but he wore a red wig. And when he got really excited, and of course there was no air conditioning, the wig would come off. Nobody had copies of the bills. I could not understand how anybody knew what they were voting on. You couldn't get an agenda of what was being voted on that day. It was all a very close shop between a few people that ran the thing. And I covered labor news, tried to get people's names in the newspaper, because I remembered in high school, what was the most important thing about a high school paper? Getting your name in the paper. Well, I figured that's probably what the labor people would like too, to get their names in the paper. So I tried to get as much local input as I could. I enjoyed the job. It was very educational, but it was touch and go as to whether I was going to get paid every Friday. It was kind of a touch and go operation. And so we had to come to the parting of the ways.
Really?
And then I had various other jobs. Ended up, while my husband was finishing medical school, Korean War, the Wage Stabilization Board. Wage and price were under controls during the Korean War. And with my experience, having worked in the labor paper, knowing something about industrial relations, I went to work for the Wage Stabilization Board. That was interesting.
What were your duties?
In those days, you couldn't give a wage increase without going through the board. And of course, the labor market was pretty tight in those days. And so the companies wanted to give wage increases. So they would come to the board with justification of, these are the comparable wages, we've got to match the market, we need to give this increase, and it was usually a joint proposal by the union and the company. And then the Wage Stabilization Board had to make a decision. So I was the staff person to the Wage Stabilization Board.
So what happened after that?
Well, after that, my husband became an intern at Washington University in St. Louis. So I had a job in St. Louis with the Machinists Union, very strong in St. Louis. McConnell Douglas, lots of industries that were organized by the Machinists Union. They ran a very clean shop. It was totally different from the situation that I had observed in Atlanta, where things were kind of loose with this Journal of Labor. And I was hired because, of course, I'd worked for the Wage Stabilization Board, and I knew how to do petitions to get a wage increase. So, of course, the Machinists Union wanted, hey, she knows how to do this. She'll help us get these increases passed by the Wage Stabilization Board. So that was why I went there. And then I took a sabbatical, and I raised 3 children. So I was out of the labor market until about 1966.
When did you first come to Sandy Springs?
We came to Sandy Springs in 1960. We had been living in DeKalb County, but we'd outgrown the house. And at that point, my husband's income was such that we could aspire to a house we really wanted. So we bought a lot on Trumbull Road in Sandy Springs. At that time, there was water, but there was no gas, no sewer. You had to be on a septic tank. There was no 285. Of course, there was no Georgia 400. There was no hospital. Pill Hill, the big concentration of hospitals, there was nothing. We were on the edge of development, and it was like living in the country. Next door, we had a farm. So I've seen unbelievable changes since I moved here.
When did you first become involved in civic affairs?
Well, we were living in a suburban bedroom community that was rapidly filling up. Development was coming helter-skelter with no plans. And the zoning was being done by a Fulton County Commission, which was not responsive to our community. We had nobody from Sandy Springs on the commission. And yet this commission that represented Atlanta areas and South Fulton areas, they were making all the decisions about the land use in Sandy Springs, and we didn't like the decisions. And more of us felt that they were ruining our community, and we're still paying the price now for the helter-skelter development and the lack of standards that were in place in the 60s and 70s and on into the 80s, really. So the reason I became involved is that I didn't like what was going on in terms of governance and land use and zoning and lack of public services. Couldn't get trash cans emptied on Roswell Road. In fact, for a while we didn't have any. So I just knew that there was a better way to govern Sandy Springs, and it had to be closer to home.
So you formed a committee.
We formed a committee, and it was called the Committee for Sandy Springs, and the objective of the committee was to obtain local government. And we started off with maybe 10 people meeting in my living room, and that was 1975. We started in 1975. And it went on until the year 2005 when we finally became a city, so it took us 30 years. The committee, of course, changed the board of directors over the years. I don't know, many people served on that board of directors. One of our council members now was on one of the very early boards, and I just was with them this weekend, and I reminded him, yeah, you were on the board early on. He said, yeah, and I left because I thought it was hopeless. And now he's the council member.
But you stuck it out 30 years.
I just knew we needed it, you know, and I couldn't understand why people didn't see it that way downtown.
I recall there was a great effort on the part of the city of Atlanta to annex Sandy Springs.
And of course, that played right into our hands because people did not want to be annexed. And of course, that was during the days of integrating the schools. And Atlanta was a very integrated system. And Fulton County, being a sort of a bedroom community up here, had a very low black African American population. So there was huge resistance of merging the two school systems, which would have had to happen if you annexed. So if we were annexed into Atlanta, we would be part of the Atlanta school system. And that made people, you know, they became hysterical.
Let's talk about the process of becoming a city. It requires legislative action. In fact, it's almost impossible. You have to get enabling legislation. You have to get the governor to sign it. Then you have to have a referendum on the people. Explain to us that process.
And then you have to be approved by the Justice Department.
Oh, that's true now, isn't it? Yes. So explain that process to us and help us understand.
Well, for many years, we were blocked in the legislature with our attempt to pass a bill that would allow us to have a referendum. We were looking at Florida, where if you meet certain criteria, you don't need to have approval by the legislature to have a referendum. But Georgia is still a state with lots of control at the state level as to what happens in the local areas. So we were not allowed to just have a referendum if we wanted it. We needed a legislation. And it had to go through the Fulton County delegation. You had to get approval. And they had a 2/3 rule. You had to get approval of 2/3 of the members of the Fulton delegation to allow you to have a bill to have a referendum. Well, Atlanta controls the Fulton delegation. I should say controlled, because with redistricting that is going away this year. So it was hopeless. We could not get this 2/3. And it was interesting because Billy McKinney was chairman of the Fulton delegation for many years. And his daughter, Cynthia McKinney, was also a legislator. So there were two McKinneys in the Fulton delegation. Well, Cynthia McKinney was put in charge of a subcommittee to deal with the Sandy Springs issue. And I thought, well, I'm going to make friends with Cynthia. And we had a relationship. It started because she wanted to take her kid out of Atlanta school into a private school. And the headmistress of the private school was my neighbor. So that was how we got Cynthia's kid into a private school. So then I invited Cynthia as chairman of this subcommittee to come and visit Sandy Springs. And we arranged for her to visit one of our very, very integrated elementary schools, High Point Elementary School. And I went to the principal's office at 9 o'clock and waiting for Cynthia to come, and he had this darling little black child in his lap, stroking her. She had had an epileptic fit. And he knew what to do because it had happened before, and they had called the mother. The mother was to come. But you could not have seen a more caring situation than what he was engaged in. And in walks Cynthia and sees this relationship, you know. So, I mean, to make a long story short, she recommended passage of the bill, and of course it was a done deal. The committee voted it down. So it was so frustrating, and I could not get the speaker to help us because in those days there was an alliance in the Georgia legislature between the rural Democrats and the Black Caucus. And those were the two groups that kept the speaker in office, and he could not alienate either one of those groups. And I can't tell you how many trips I made to South Georgia, not just myself, but people on the committee. We were assigning different legislators in different counties. Go visit them, make friends, tell them our story. We had those rural legislators on our side. We did. And of course, when the House became majority Republican, they all voted for us. The Democrats voted for us too, because they were no longer having to listen to the speaker.
You had to campaign for a referendum. How did you approach that?
Well, we had two people on our board of directors of the Committee for Sandy Springs who were in public relations and knew how to do campaigns, and we had yard signs all over Sandy Springs that said,
They used to
vote
say,
yes. Yes.
I remember that.
Yeah, they were all over the place. And we just did public relations, and we got some money from industry, from employers, to help us pay for this. Now, the business community had not been supportive of the Committee for Sandy Springs all those years. We never really could get the business community to buy into it. The Sandy Springs Chamber. So trying to get individual business people to help us pay for this, it took a lot of legwork. And the referendum was totally paid for by contributions from major employers.
It passed by a sizable margin.
92%.
I'd say that's very sizable.
92%. And I can still remember the night that we celebrated, when the first precinct was called in. It was, you know, somewhere in 90. Oh, we were just going bananas. We couldn't contain our joy. And we had signs all over Sandy Springs all those years before we became a city that said, unincorporated Sandy Springs. And many, many a time I was tempted to get a spray can of paint and paint over that UN part, you know. So that night, when we got the referendum results, we had this big banner that said unincorporated Sandy Springs, and we ripped off the unparked.
I have had some experience with legislative activity, and you have piqued my curiosity about how a person from suburban Atlanta could convince a South Georgia legislator who normally didn't give a flip about Atlanta or the suburbs to support you.
They sympathized with the fact that we were a group of local people that wanted to control our own local destiny, and they came from smaller units, smaller governments. They knew how much better those smaller units were, where you could make your own decisions. And I think that's why they went along with us. And there was no love lost between the South Georgia rural Democrats and the city of Atlanta. There was no love lost there. So in some ways, I think they were glad to stick it to Atlanta, but they never had the freedom to do that, while Speaker Murphy controlled who was going to be on what committee.
So, but you were very successful, and you should be congratulated.
Well, it's turned out to be very, very successful.
Shortly after the referendum, you had the duty, well, you had the responsibility to create a city. That must have been quite a job.
Well, we had a member on the board of the Committee for Sandy Springs by the name of Oliver Porter. And about March of 2005, when it became obvious that we were going to be able to pass the bill, Mr. Porter would come to our meetings and say, "You've got a tiger by the tail. How are you going to run this city? How are you going to organize it?" And he prodded us, and he made timelines. You've got to get this done by this date, and you got to get this done, and he organized us. So we gave him a title. We made an interim city manager without a salary. And he's a very, very astute and intelligent person. He came up with this idea that we would outsource the services. And I had been familiar with outsourcing and governmental arrangements, especially in California. I guess I forgot to tell you this, that I got a PhD in economics in the interim, and my field was urban finance. And I worked in the area of urban finance many, many years.
Let's get back to that, if you don't mind. Let's go, this was before or after the election. You had to have an election to choose your form of government.
I worked as a consultant in urban finance in the 1980s and 90s. So all the time while we were trying to get a city, I was immersed in governmental consulting. It so happened that I ended up doing the business license that Fulton County adopted, a new business license that's based on the gross receipts of businesses, and which was a new way of doing it. And the interesting thing is, when we became a city, we adopted that business license. I also worked with Cobb County, their business licenses on a similar basis. I worked with Rome. They were always disputing with Floyd County who's to do what, how you pay for which. So I tried to get them more coordinated so that the cost of service should be borne by the people who get it. That should be fundamental on local governmental services.
You were elected mayor. Nobody in their world doubted that you would be the mayor. How did you arrive at that? Was it a decision or a conclusion?
I just sort of slid into it, you know. It just seemed to be the natural thing to do. I didn't really plan it. I didn't agonize about it. I just sort of slid into it and ran for mayor.
So you're the mayor. You have a city council. You're looking at outsourcing. How would you go about choosing someone to provide your city services?
Well, in the first go-around, as I mentioned, Oliver Porter, our interim city manager, designed an RFP, a request for proposals, which outlined the services that would need to be provided. Of course, we had studied those services all along as we was at a committee for Sandy Springs. What is it that we would take over that Fulton County was currently doing? We had done lots of calculations of what it would cost. We had done many calculations, and that was my field because I knew how to do this as a consultant. How much money would the various taxes and fees raise for us? So we knew we were pretty much on target in terms of what the revenue would be in terms of our previous analyses. And then Mr. Porter led the effort to send out the RFPs to the world of commerce. We got these services, who wants to come and provide them at what cost? And after the bill passed and the governor signed it, we got the governor to appoint a commission, a governor's commission. In other words, we had to get away from this group of activists. I was an activist. So we had a governor's commission that was made up of Mr. Porter and some other Sandy Springs folks and some more people that the governor assigned. But it gave it an aura of being official. And they're the ones that helped decide the company as they came in and made their bids and deciding which company it should be. Because all of this was done before any of us in the city had the right to sign a piece of paper. So actually, the company that was chosen by the governor's commission came in and started spending money like crazy to get us ready to be a city before we could hand over a penny to pay them. It was done on a handshake.
Really? Before we get along, let me ask you this question. How did you decide the boundaries of the city of Sandy Springs?
They were predetermined. Fulton County was divided into planning districts. That was part of the structure of Fulton County. So the planning district for Sandy Springs, which had been in place on Fulton County official records, began at the city limits of Atlanta and went up to the river, Roswell being on the other side, to the DeKalb line on the east, and the river on the west. So there was never any question as to what the boundaries would be.
What services now does your consulting company provide?
Every service in this building is provided by companies except police and fire. Our police and fire departments are city-run, city officials, city staff, everything city. Planning and zoning, that's called community development. One company runs that. Communications, the same company got the bid on that. They got the bid on community development. We have Public Works, URS, major, huge engineering company. Parks and Recreation are run by Jacobs Engineering Company. And then there's another company that runs all the administrative and the finance department. The municipal court is run by a private company. When we began in 2005, all the services that were outsourced came to the same company, CH2M Hill. They were the bidders on everything. The contract was for 5 years. So when we approached the end of the 5 years, we believe in competition. That's why we're outsourcing. Well, if you believe in competition, you've got to go back to the market and prove that you're really competing. So we put it out for bids again at the end of the 5th year. And we said you could come in and bid on the whole thing like CH2 had done, or you can also come and bid on pieces of it. And we're going to see if all of you bidders that come in, can you do the work? Are you qualified? Are you meeting all the scope of work that we've outlined? Very specific scope of work, so that there's no argument about this has to get done. We know it's in the contract. And strangely enough, it came out less expensive with the individual contracts. than the bidder that came in with the whole contract. You would have thought it would be the other way. But there were a lot of hungry companies out there. This was a year ago. There were a lot of people who wanted business. We got good bids. We're saving $7 million annually over what we were paying before we went back to the market.
As mayor, what is your relationship with these companies? Do they bring their problems to you?
No, they bring their problems to the city manager, and the city manager brings their problems to them. In Sandy Springs, the mayor and the council are part-timers. My salary is $25,000 a year. Our council members get $12,000. We're here to make policy. We are not here to micromanage this business. That is the city manager's job, and he is a city employee. He and the clerk of the city are city employees. Of course, we have city attorneys who are city employees. So we do have 6 or 7 employees. But everybody else in this building works for a company.
So has this outsourcing worked as well as you had hoped?
Well, the satisfaction level of our citizens is tremendously high. And we had a survey done 2 years ago by a national company that surveys other municipalities so that you can have a comparison of where your ratings fall compared to, say, other cities of the same general size. And the ratings we got back were phenomenal. Nothing came in that was under 80%. So you can't argue with that kind of evaluation. And we continue to strive to make everything better. We are able, well, let me go back and say this. We knew that you could not have a new city, that the people were not going to approve a new city if it was going to be a tax increase. So we were paying 4.7 mils to the county for what was called a special service district. And that district was created to run the local services that were not countywide. So when we became a city, in the charter, we are limited to the same 4.7 mils, no tax increase. And we promised that to our citizens. The only way you can increase taxes in Sandy Springs is to have a referendum of the people to amend the charter. Now, you know that's not going to happen.
Well,
So here we are with the same millage rate that we used to pay to Fulton County. We had 40 policemen in the Fulton County. We now have 125. We had not seen a paving truck in generations. We've paved 100 miles of road. We wanted sidewalks. People want sidewalks. It's something everybody wants now. They don't walk, but they want sidewalks. So we've put in at least 10 miles of sidewalk. We are addressing the stormwater problems because in some ways Fulton County did not have very good standards of how to put in those are old corrugated iron pipes and they're collapsing, and we're having to go back now and fix those things. So what I'm saying is that's a lot of capital investment, not just running your city day to day. It's capital that we're spending. We are able to put close to 20% of our annual budget into capital. And the reason we can do that is because we're outsourcing and it's cheaper to outsource.
there have been at least 2 Fulton County areas that have become cities since Sandy Springs, Johns Creek, Dunwoody. Did they consider outsourcing? Did they come to you and ask for your advice?
Oh, yes. And of course, they've all outsourced. It's in Fulton County, we've added Johns Creek and the city of Milton, 2 new cities. And third, there's a new city in South Fulton called Chattahoochee Hills. So the only part of Fulton County now that is not in a city is one small hole not too far from the airport near East Point. Why they don't want to join Maybe they do want, I don't know. But at any rate, it's just this one little piece of Fulton County that's not in the city. Then Dunwoody came along, they're in DeKalb. Peachtree Corners, just incorporated, that's in Gwinnett. And Brookhaven is to vote in July.
Right. What will happen to Fulton County?
Well, of course, there's a great desire on the part of the people on the northern end of the county, which includes Sandy Springs, Roswell, Alpharetta, Johns Creek, to rejuvenate Milton County, which is what this used to be. In the 1930s, Milton County and I think Campbell County went broke, and so they were incorporated and merged to form this very, very long Fulton County. So there's a great desire on the part of the people up here on the north end to get out of the Fulton County government because it is dysfunctional. It costs a fortune, and it spends money wildly on things that shouldn't be spent on. And we just want Milton County. We want our own county because we know we can. We've proven how we can run our cities. We know we can run a county for less than it costs them. So what would happen if we did that? The point I keep making to the people in Atlanta is it would be your salvation, because what's left of Fulton County is almost the same size of Atlanta. Merge. Get rid of one of those mammoth governments. You don't need both Atlanta and Fulton County. Merge those two governments. At the minimum, you would save the administrative overhead of one of them, and the administrative overheads at least 20% of their budgets. So I think it would be a tax cut for the people of Atlanta. But I'm not going to be around to see that happen. It took us 30 years to get a city of Sandy Springs. I don't know how long it's going to take to merge Atlanta and Fulton County.
That's a very interesting idea. And, you know, I can think of some areas in the country that have done that, counties and cities merging, but I don't know what the possibility of Atlanta doing.
Well, you live in a merged government, Atlanta and Clark. I mean, Athens and Clark.
Athens and Clark, yes. I think that's
Columbus and Muskogee.
Right, that's right. So a big county of all the new cities in the north, and would solve your problems as far as you're concerned.
Yes, and I don't think that we should leave Atlanta in the lurch and Fulton County in the lurch. And that's why I keep saying to them, this would be your salvation. You're paying these horrible taxes, Atlanta and Fulton County. Atlanta's taxes are much higher than Sandy Springs taxes. So if you could merge those two units, you're bound to get a tax cut.
Has anything fallen through the cracks as far as your new city is concerned?
Well, of course, there's always somebody who's going to complain and say not everything is being done. But I don't see anything that's fallen through the cracks. We have minor glitches now and then. I just had a letter from somebody who was very upset that we allowed a race to come through on a Saturday that closed her streets, and she had to wait 10 minutes. The police wouldn't let her go because people were running. So yeah, you're going to have problems, but all in all, it's worked out beautifully.
Let's get back to Eva Galambos. What's ahead?
Well, I'm getting ready to celebrate my 84th birthday. And I'm going on my last trip on the bucket list. I'm going to St. Petersburg in August.
Oh, really?
I've been all over the world. I've seen many, many wonderful places, but I've never been to St. Petersburg, and I want to see it. And it really is the last thing on my list. I've gotten to see everything else I want to see. I might want to go back to some of those places. So I am not making any kind of judgments yet as to what I'll do when my term is in another year and a half. I don't know whether I'll run again or not. I don't know. I have to consider my age, but I also consider that I'm doing okay.
So you're not running for governor?
No way.
What do you feel has been your biggest accomplishment?
Well, I always think the biggest accomplishment for a woman is raising their children. I have 3 very successful children. I have 2 boys and a girl. My daughter is a physician in the Seattle area, and she's raised 2 wonderful boys. And I have 2 sons. One is the doctor here in Atlanta, Piedmont Hospital. He was trained by my husband. And I have a son who's a physicist, and he's scientific director of the accelerator in Oak Ridge. And right now he's in Sweden helping them with, they want to build an accelerator. He's their consultant. So I think that is always the most important legacy that anybody can leave is, how did your children do?
What's been your biggest disappointment?
You know, I don't have a big disappointment. I can't say. I've just had a very, very happy life, and I don't have a big disappointment.
Well, as you say in your autobiography, you have really truly had a very good life. And we wish you luck and thank you for being with us.
I enjoyed doing it, Mr. Short.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Yes, traffic, of course, is a problem. It is a problem in every successful jurisdiction. Why do you have traffic? Because people want to come where you are. And sometimes I say to the business community when they complain about traffic on Roswell Road, what are you complaining about? Those are your potential customers. If they weren't there, you wouldn't be doing any business. And I always point to Buckhead, which is probably the premier economic entity in the metro area. Highest rents, very successful retail. Traffic is horrible. Traffic is awful. Fifth Avenue, New York, you can't move. It's successful. So, of course, we want to reduce the time in the commute to work. I think that's very important. And some of the improvements on the T-Splost may perhaps help the commute. But it's been interesting. The governor came up with an idea just in the last month or so. Use the shoulders of your road on Georgia 400. And at first everybody thought, shoulders? How will the police get where they're supposed to go? It's impossible. You've got all these exits. Well, lo and behold, he put it in and it's working. So sometimes there may be solutions that are not as expensive as what we thought. Now, I am not a proponent of heavy rail. I think heavy rail is so expensive. I believe in bus rapid transit with dedicated lanes. It's much more flexible. And I think we made a terrible mistake with the heavy rail in Atlanta because we didn't anticipate where the development would be. All the rail goes downtown. Where are the jobs? On 285, all around the periphery. That trains don't go there.
Good. That's great. Thanks.